I'm not hearing anything from anybody.
I'm just being very quiet, but I could hear you, Tad.
And I can hear you too, RJ, but that's all I can hear.
Hello there and welcome to the Drax Files Book Club, I was going to say. See, now I'm totally flustered. Welcome to the Second Life Book Club. My name is Draxtor Dupre. It's another week, another amazing group of guests, and we just came off a long sound check, but we're all good here. We're sitting in a special venue, and I understand Strawberry on camera just cammed in from outside. So there's a magnificent castle. I'll get into the details about this later. It was custom built by Solus because today we're going to talk about fantasy literature, the golden age. Actually, we also might examine if this is in fact the golden age of fantasy entertainment in book form, or if it only applies to TV. As someone who does not watch TV, I'm of course perfectly suited to moderate this program. Anyways, the person that you hear here is Tad Williams, and he's on the panel together with Fran, Wilde, and RJ Barker. I will introduce them in just a minute. We have to go through a quick housekeeping notes. I was told that I talk too much. Keep it very brief. Not by anybody here in the room, but mostly my wife. So you know the drill. The Book Club Island is open 24/7. We meet here every Wednesday at 12 o'clock for the flagship show. We do not discriminate against lapsed readers, so if the last novel you read was assigned to you back in high school, you can still attend. And since we're listed in the destination guide and under featured events, you may bump into a well-meaning noob. I actually called somebody a newbie today, and they got mad, but I meant it in a very endearing way when I say newbie. So please be kind to them, befriend them, recommend some books. Actually, why not befriend your neighbor or even one of the guests right now? So we're booked solid through May 2021. You can still suggest authors, though. Send me an email. Big thanks to the team that puts the show together every week. Strawberry Linden, who is on camera and streaming. Brett Linden helps out with security and marketing. Patch Linden, the whole governance team, including the moles. Marianne McCann customized the venue. Not this venue, though. This venue was built by Solus. Solus is in the audience. Thank you so much. This is an amazing job. An entire castle with all the decoration. Absolutely amazing. Kralos dresses up the avatars. Silas Merlin has a whole bunch of his items around here, too, in the decoration. So thank you, Silas. Today's guest, let me introduce them. And we're going of course, ladies first. We'll start with Fran Wilde. Fran is an author of many short stories and novels. According to her website, she's also teaching writing at Western Colorado University. She's writing for middle grade with Riverland. Her Nebula Award-winning debut novel, Updraft, came out in, I believe, 2016. I'm reading it right now. All the books, by the way, are here on the table. You can cam around and look at them, and you can click on them, and that will bring up the reading list for today. Welcome, Fran. How are you? I believe you've been to SL before. I saw you at Fantasy Fair. Is that right?
Yes, thank you very much, Draxtor, for having me. I had the great pleasure of being at the Relay for Life Fantasy Fair earlier this spring, and that was a lot of fun. But this is my first time at Book Club Island, so I'm delighted to be here.
It's not your first rodeo, but it's your first book club. Do you find Second Life strange as a fantasy writer? Some fantasy writers, I feel that's my impression, don't like game environments or digital environments. And I don't know, maybe I'm just making this up. It's like, they're taking away our customers. They should not be playing games. They should be reading our books.
So I'm a bit of a hybrid. I write fantasy, but I also write science fiction. I have a new story coming out in Asimov's magazine in January of this year, and I've got a couple of stories up at Tor.com. And then I have an op-ed for the future in the New York Times from last fall called Please Stop Printing Unicorns, which is all about 3D printing in the future and what happens when Fisher Price and Price Waterhouse get together and make a 3D printer. But I'm also a computer programmer. My last languages were PHP and Ruby on Rails, and so I'm pretty comfortable here. I'm a big gamer. I love tabletop as well as video games, so this doesn't bother me at all. I'm actually really excited about the platform.
So you can walk and chew gum at the same time. But is this something that you encountered within
Not
the
an
community?
SL, that would crash.
Wait a minute. We'll talk about this in the post game. SL never crashes. Now, so you'll be reading from Updraft a bit later. It's really just such an amazing world you're building there, taking place in a city of towers that grow out of bone, citizens traveling with artificial wings. There's a social hierarchy that's determined on where you live in the tower, below, above. I mean, it's like J.G. Ballard, I guess, in a fantasy context almost. When I read debut novels, I'm always thinking, and is this something that you lived with for a long time before you came out with it? We just had Primi Mohammed last week, and she said, I've been actually
Primi's
writing
great.
this like since I'm 14 years old. Yeah.
So, no, Updraft, I wrote the first short story that became Updraft in 2011 at a writing workshop called Viable Paradise. And I had just been having an argument with Stephen Bruce about Milton and also about some Firefly stuff, I think. But I was a Milton scholar in college, as well as studying a whole bunch of poetry and other things. And the short story challenge that week at the workshop was based on a prompt that they gave you in a bag. So I wrote 1,500 words that was essentially a fall from heaven story with arguments included about Stephen Bruce, and that became eventually a longer story that I thought I was going to sell to Beneath Ceaseless Skies, which publishes a lot of my short fiction. Along the way, it had lots and lots of influences. Stephen Gould's Peaches for Mad Molly, K.W. Jeter's Farewell Horizontal. There's a lot of science fiction in there. And there's also, a lot of the reading that I did when I was growing up and as in college as well. All came into Updraft. There's a lot about singing and community and how community stories become mythologized and turned into legend. And frankly, I was writing this during the Occupy Wall Street movement, and that definitely got packed in there too. So it's kind of all it's like when you pack a whole bunch of stuff into a vat and see what comes out. That's quite often the process for me. But I started the path towards Updraft began in earnest in 2012 when I wrote the first draft of the novel in 6 weeks. And then it took me about another 6 months to revise it and then put it out on submission. And I got my first agent with submission for Updraft, and then they sold it to Tor. And it's safe to read, you guys. All 3 books in the Bone Universe series are out. The last book is Horizon, and that concluded in 2017. So all 3 are available.
Safe to read. Huh? We'll get into this later. What is not safe to read? Now,
no.
RJ is sitting right next to you here.
Hi.
RJ is the author of the Wounded Kingdom trilogy, which is all about assassins, and I have it here actually also on the table because you sent me the German translation, which is awesome. Thank you again, RJ, because I love to read stuff in translation. I love to compare. As I'm translating an English YA novel myself at this moment. Now, you are a lapsed, I have to say this, you're a lapsed heavy metal musician or a hard rock musician.
Yes.
You correct me if I'm wrong. If you're more in the hard rock genre vis-a-vis heavy metal, I myself come from the speed metal subgenre.
No, metal.
Metal,
Definitely. Yeah.
Speed
no,
or death?
I'm making the sign of the horns, but my avatar isn't, because he's
you
lazy.
Told me. Your avatar is so lazy, you can't even make the sign of the horn.
Yeah, well, but I was quite metal. I was just very bad at it. That was my big. The hair was great, but everything else, no.
So is that really true that you were like, okay, I'm not good enough at metal. I'm going to do something related, and then you listen to a Ronnie James Dio album. You go like, I can just string together these lyrics and make a book out of it.
No, I'd always been a reader, and that was sort of my primary love was reading. And then I heard Guns N' Roses when I was about 15, and I had two sort of revelations. One was it was the most amazing thing I'd ever heard in my entire life, and two, because I've always been quite feminine looking and acting, and I realised that if I wore lots of makeup, I suddenly became attractive to girls. So music became my obsession at that point. And then sort of I played for a long time and eventually realised I wasn't good enough. And I went back to, I thought I want to do something artistic and creative. But what can I do? Because I'm not ever going to do this well enough. And I went back to my first love, which was writing. Unfortunately, I hadn't exactly finished school because of the absolute belief I was going to be a rock star. So I did have to teach myself all about the English language again. But it's been
This is
worth it.
amazing. I mean, RJ, I love these because we have a lot of aspiring writers in the audience. And by the way, just real quick for the folks on the stream, I know Tad Williams is saying, "Where's Tad?" Tad was abducted by aliens. I hope he'll be back. I'm talking a back channel with his wife Deborah. We'll bring him back.
Hang on. I'm still here. I just never mind.
He's a disembodied voice.
Yeah, hang on. I'm the lag time is doing strange things. Ignore me. I'll get back in here. So hang on.
Strawberry cam on the empty chair. It's Tad's voice, but his body is not here. What's happening? So RJ, this is an incredibly inspiring story. I'm wondering, how did you get the confidence when you had already sort of this experience or the self sort of awareness that, okay, this whole heavy metal business is not going anywhere. Why were you so sure that the writing would go somewhere?
Ignorance, basically. I didn't know how hard it was to start off with, and there's nothing else I can do. So I just didn't stop really, and I'm incredibly lazy. So I set myself my goal was to be signed to one of the big 5 publishers, and not self-publish. Not because I think there's something wrong with it, just because I do it and I'd be like, yeah, I've done it now, I'm finished. So I had set myself a target that I thought was impossible, and I just kept going. I had a bit of a break for about 7 years to be really ill, which was really boring. Don't do it. And then I had to teach myself English again, because I'd kind of forgotten everything while I was lying in bed groaning a lot. And then I got an agent by a really weird set of coincidences. And that agent sacked me, but put me onto another agent who's my current agent, and Age of Assassins got signed. And a bit like Fran, actually, I wrote Age of Assassins in 6 weeks in a kind of flush of steroids, partly. And I just had this idea that I knew worked, and it just came straight out. Had it done like that. Click.
This is really an amazing story, because it shows, and kids do try this at home. Don't. That's how I'm leading the little Drax as well, because sometimes when when you're intimidated by the knowledge of how hard something is, and put that into relation with what you're able to do right now in the present time, depending on how you're wired as personality-wise, this can completely discourage you. So ignorance can be your best friend in that phase.
And like Fran mentioned, class is a big thing in my books, because when I was at school, despite that, I loved English and I was good at it, and I was always reading and flying through stuff. It was never, because I was like a working class kid from the north of England, it never suggested to me that I could do that for a living. And I think the reason I did music was it seemed more realistic than writing novels, which I absolutely adored. Books, they've always been my companion and my solace and my place to hide. So yeah, I think I don't.
It's always.
Please, Fran, jump right in.
I just wanted to say it's always really interesting because authors are really come from all walks of life, and we're not, swimming around in our money pools by any stretch of the imagination. We're just people that love to tell stories. And if you find some writers that you love, definitely let them know, because sometimes that's what we eat, is the compliments and the kindnesses of others.
That email appears in your inbox every so often, just saying, I needed this on this day, and you're just like, I love you. If I wasn't married.
You're sending these to yourself, RJ, or what? You have like a bot?
We have a round robin of authors sending them to each other. There's a massive conspiracy theory guy.
We do the blurbs at the same time.
Yeah.
Here's this is disembodied Ted. What did you repeat, please?
I said we do the blurbs at the same time. It's called log rolling, and it's a vital part. No, we don't. By the way, I'm in an airport. So just so I don't know if anybody in the audience can actually hear me, but I'm in the airport right now. I can't get back in. I got bumped out of Second Life. I can't get back into the bookstore because
we'll get you in. Because the region is full. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. So now
we'll get him in.
I got your message, Drax. I got your message. Okay. So
we have god powers, not I, but the Lindens. You know how this works, Ted. It's really not a democracy. It's just a bunch of gods, and some of them are benevolent and some are not, and some will teleport you into the venue as we speak.
I seem to be back in the venue here.
Coming in, and
I'm a bit disappointed. I was going to be telling people that I did a thing with the ghost of Tad Williams. That was going to be my eating out.
Archie, I think this would be a good blurb. The ghost of Ted Williams says, "The Age of Assassins," whatnot.
I think RJ, if you're gonna dine out on that, you need to find a better class of friend. Is what I think. It's not a very exciting story. Yeah, I did an event with Tad Williams, but he wasn't there. Yeah, that's okay. Hang on, I'm on Book Club Island. I'm somewhere in the building.
Okay. If you're on Book Club Island, we see you. You're walking around in the back. Strawberry Cam in there. He's walking behind the mirror.
I am so embarrassed. This is so not supposed to be about me, and this keeps happening. I was just minding my own business, listening to Fran and RJ, and then like 5 seconds later, I was literally in outer space, and then I was in an airport. So,
Dirk Höpfner, Ted, a fan of yours from Germany, Dirk Höpfner says in the YouTube chat, he says, "A bug from Otherland." And now, Ted, you're standing and you're big on the screen. You're standing in the burning candles right now. But Ted is such a superhero. He's not even catching on fire. Now he's walking backstage and he's coming on the stage, and it's just amazing.
How the hell? Is there anybody who can just put me in a damn chair here so we're not spending so much time worrying about what I'm doing, because I'm really embarrassed that I'm taking so much attention.
This is super hilarious. Tad, this is so good. I teleported you on the stage. You should get a teleport request, and then you're on the stage and you can click the chair. So in the meantime, I was going to ask also RJ the same thing about your first novel. Oh, well, you actually somewhat answered that, but did the subject matter live with you for a long time, or was that something that came very fresh when you just knocked it out? It's so interesting because a lot of people have something, including me on the musical side, is a melody or something that was with me since I was very little. So this is a question that I find fascinating.
No, I as a person, I very rarely look back. I'm not into nostalgia. I want new things all the time. I actually find writing a trilogy quite hard, because by the time I get to writing book 3, I really want to be doing something else by that point. So no, it wasn't. And in fact, I was meant to be doing something else, because I'd submitted a science fiction novel, because I'm a tart. I'll write anything. I just love words. and it nearly sold. And then some of the editors came back and we thought, oh, RJ might be able to do a murder mystery with a serial killer on a space station type thing. And my agent said, all right, have a go at that. And I started writing it. And then I had the idea that became Age of Assassins. And I emailed my agent and said, no, I've had this other idea, I'm going to write it. And he wrote back and said, look, a first-person fantasy murder mystery will have to be really good to sell. And what I heard from that was, write a really good book. And what he meant was, do not write that book under any circumstances. But it was what I wanted to do, so I did it. That's probably partly why we parted ways. He's lovely. I love him. He's a really good chap and everything because he got me a new agent. But there's nothing that I've hung on to that from the past, because I always want that's new, and ideas are not a problem for me. I could do with less.
RJ, I'm sorry, I'm still apparently not present. I've got some kind of requesting teleport bar that's slowly moving across. But I wanted to ask you something, which is, actually, it sounded to me from reading your descriptions that you have accepted the idea that if you're going to write one kind of genre in another kind of genre, that you have to honor both genres. Is that fair to say? In other words, if you're going to write a mystery within a fantasy novel, it has to be a real mystery. You can't just nod at it. You have to treat it just as seriously as if you were writing an English parlor mystery.
Yeah, and I think I probably came at it more as a mystery than as a fantasy novel, really, because that's probably more my background is Agatha Christie and stuff like that. So it even has a proper, let's get everyone together and this is how it was done ending.
Yeah, because that was one of the things that I personally really respected when Umberto Eco wrote The Name of the Rose. Here's this extremely talented, acknowledged literary craftsperson, and yet he wrote a mystery novel as a mystery novel. I mean, yes, there was historical stuff. Yes, there was philosophical stuff. Yes, there was all the other things, but he honored the conventions of the mystery and gave you an actual mystery story in the midst of everything else. So I was always very impressed by that. And that's always been kind of my approach too. So that's kind of what I got from your what you had said about it.
Yeah.
To echo both Tad and RJ, that's the promise that you make to the reader. It's not here, have a story. It's here, have a story of this genre. And if you tell them it's a romance and then suddenly everyone's dead at the end, that's kind of like giving somebody brownies made out of zucchini. It's not quite what they expected, and they're gonna make faces at you.
I'm very glad.
I love.
Oh, go ahead. Keep going.
I love what China Miéville does, because China's goal seems to be to write one book in every genre. And so The Scar is absolutely nautical fantasy, and Embassy Town is space opera, basically the scar but in space. And each time he commits to the genre that he's writing in a really beautiful way. The City in the City is an excellent thriller, and it's structured to the gears and changes of that genre in particular. So if you can write a mystery and have fantasy elements or sci-fi elements in it, then you're doing great, because you're actually operating on two planes at once. I just finished a fantasy romance that is coming out next year. That is, you cannot remove the fantasy elements from it still have it be, this is perfect. And you can't remove the romance elements from it. You have to have both together. And I love that too.
I think it's, by the way, I just have no freaking idea what's going on with my avatar. I'm currently sitting in empty black space as far as I can see.
You're all good. Chili, if you can sit, and then Tad can swap. Chili is in the audience. He is a experienced sitting arranger. There you go. And boom, there you go. Thank you, Chili. That's it. And
I should hit swap.
No, you're done. And Tad, please also hit the speak button, and people can hear you in World. And if people can't hear Tad in World, then they can go to YouTube.
It's already highlighted, so I'm hoping that means it's working. The one thing that I wanted to say is, I think that one of the fascinating things, and I'll be interested to hear if RJ and Fran agree with me. One of the really interesting things about genre is that genre is not a type of anything. Genre, I think, is an agreement with your readers to observe certain kinds of forms. In a sense, one of the comparisons I often use is like modern dance versus ballet, classic corps de ballet, which is full of restrictions. Classic ballet is full of restrictions, many of them 200 or more years old. Mm-hmm. But the fact is that people like that particular set of restrictions and what it creates. And in a sense, genre is a bit like that. It's not completely modern dance. You can't just do anything you want because you've made an agreement with the readers. If it's a fantasy, science fiction, mystery.
I always think that stories.
Go ahead, RJ.
Stories about people, and that's the language that we speak in stories. But genre is the dialect that we put over it. If that makes sense, that's how I think.
That absolutely makes sense. Absolutely.
This is really interesting because I have a lot of questions along those lines, and let me just throw out one because you said what did you say? Zucchini brownies, Fran. I'm a person who loves zucchini brownies. Now, let me just ask you guys. So, if
but you have to say these are zucchini brownies. You can't say this is molten chocolate brownies and then hand them zucchini brownies. You have to tell them what it's what Ted said. I always talk about it as the promise that we make to the reader. And I think that it's a really important. A book exists in the space between a reader and a writer. And you can compile a whole bunch of words into a box and hand it off and say, this is a molten chocolate brownie. And people will believe you until that first bite. And if that first bite is zucchini, they're going to be mad.
Exactly.
Fran's right.
You
10 years ago.
You become
when I first met sorry, Todd.
No, go ahead, RJ.
I said, when I first met about 10 years ago, somebody gave my wife a chocolate cake. And it was made of potato, and she has still never forgiven them. So yeah, I was Fran on that.
Exactly. No, it's only that rotten hippie neighbor of yours who would ever do that without telling you first. That's the whole thing. Fran is absolutely right. You have to disclose. You got to disclose the zucchini. You cannot just sneak a zucchini up on somebody.
So if my biggest hero in my musical career, Frank Zappa, I played in a Zappa band when I was at the conservatory, a Zappa cover band, and he released over 80 albums during his lifetime. They're still releasing albums. And he was hopping around genres, and I know already what Ted's going to say. He was coherent within the genre that he released on an album, and he pushed the genre within. He pushed the limits, but he was not ignorant of the limits. So I guess I answered my own question. I was just going to push back against your point, and now I resolved it within myself.
Yeah, the rest of us might as well just go home, Drax. You got this.
I'm just talking to myself. No, but no, I understand what you're saying, and it makes sense. I just wonder if you feel. One question that I have prepared actually is, I'm a big sci-fi fan, and I come from, and Ted knows this, from a somewhat elitist literary background where my mother was appalled that I read Conan, not because of the homophobia of Robert E. Howard, but just because it was so sort of one-dimensional. Now, I love what you guys write in the fantasy genre, but I'm not a fantasy fan. Now, if I were to come to you guys and say, you know what, I can choose sci-fi as a genre if I want current political, social issues discussed sort of in a near future setting, and I can read literary fiction if I want to know more about the human condition. Why the heck would I choose fantasy? How would you sell me on fantasy?
I have lots to say, but I'll give Fran and RJ first shot since I've been sucking a lot of oxygen out of this thing so far.
I am happy to go or listen either way.
Fran, if I were to go actually in a bookstore, hello, Fran, thank you. You have a nice bookstore here. Fantasy is just dragons and crap. I don't care. I want to know about like deeper things, relationships between human beings and such grand things.
So I would say to you that fantasy is the literature of the impossible. My friend Russell Davis says this all the time. And so fantasy as the literature of the impossible talks about monsters and dragons and fantastic worlds and maps and places that we might not get to see ever in real life, much like Second Life. On the other hand, science fiction is the literature of the possible that we haven't gotten to yet. And in that sense, that's where you get the argument between the hard science fiction must compile, can't have faster than light travel, and the sort of lighter science fiction space opera aspects that are just expansive and far-reaching. And then you've got Werner Vinge sort of in the middle, which with Fire Upon the Deep is basically a 3-part Wi-Fi dial-up joke compressed into a faster than light, hard science fiction, low science fiction, and pastoral fantasy all in one book. So I think they can all exist at the same place. We're all telling stories about the human condition under different circumstances, the impossible, the possible, and the current.
Okay, you sold me. What do you got? Got the new R.J. Barker, the Bone Ships? How much?
Why, I do. I've got Tad Williams and R.J. Barker.
I have something to say, but I want to give RJ a shot before I start spewing again. So
I'd probably start with Get Over Yourself. But fantasy to me is the stories we have always told ourselves as a species. It's the mythic stories. It's the stories we've told around the fire of it. Something in fantasy to me, the ones that grab me and I enjoy, always feel like nature is outside us, and sometimes I feel like fantasy is man is not as strong as nature, where science fiction is man's control of nature to some degree. I might be wittering. I might have just gone off on something, but
no, this is I know exactly what you're saying. This this is prevalent in your books. It's in all of you guys' books, actually. This is really the deep sort of underlying. Yeah, go ahead.
I think fantasy touches something very deep inside us. That I love science fiction, but there's a kind of appreciation of science fiction where maybe in fantasy there's something inside it that talks to me in a way I don't quite understand. The same way the King Arthur myth just utterly fascinates me, and stuff like that. And that's what fantasy has. It has that deeper understanding of something in my back brain.
I'm assuming, RJ, you know Robert Stock's work.
You just missed you for a second, and I didn't hear.
Yeah, you were breaking up. Say that again, please, Ted.
Mythago Wood, Robert Holdstock.
Yes.
Yeah, a beautiful example of diving into the mythic in the guises of a fantasy. One of the things that I wanted to say that I also think is kind of important, because the fact that we have such a apparently hard dividing line between fantasy and science fiction is largely, I think, a symptom of the last 30, 40 years of marketing. Because when I look at a lot of my favorite writers, and I've said this in the past, but I'll say it again because I think it's a thing that needs to be looked at these days. When I look at a lot of my favorite writers, and I'm talking about people like Ursula Le Guin, Ray Bradbury, Theodore Sturgeon, Roger Zelazny, Harlan Ellison, a lot of the Michael Moorcock, science fiction writers that I grew up with, science fiction fantasy writers, there really isn't a dividing line in their work. They slide back and forth all the time between these ideas that are essentially completely fantastic with very little basis in science at all. Bradbury doesn't really give a crap about science. He never particularly did. If you look at most of his science fiction stories, they completely ignore most of the science things. So he can get to the thing he really wants to talk about, whether it's an analogy of human colonization or whether he wants to talk about the death of imagination. he's setting it on Mars. He's talking about rockets, but it's not about the science. It's about the ideas. And in fact, I think that the overlap, the gray area with fantasy and science fiction is much bigger than most people acknowledge, but there has been a real push in the last 3-4 decades to make it easier to market books by giving people exactly the flavor of ice cream they've already said they like.
Exactly, because, and that brings me back to the zucchini brownie. Somebody actually put a recipe here in the local chat, I believe. See, and isn't that the problem of making it too, fit into the shelf of the slightly salted zucchini brownies vis-a-vis the non-salted zucchini brownies?
Oh, absolutely, and that's been one of the most amusing things for me of my now fairly long time in the business is seeing how things become increasingly categorized and subcategorized, where there are literally people now, and this is not a criticism at all. This is an explanation or an example. There are literally people who were writing, gay 19th century vampire fictions where, some of the vampires have dyslexia or what, there's like these increasingly small categories to try and get directly to a market. Right. This is not a criticism of any of the material at all. It's the way these things are marketed and the push that is given to writers, as RJ mentioned with his, where his agent, with whom we all have these love-hate relationships, it's kind of like being married. Not in the sense that we hate our spouses, but that it's not. No, it's obviously not. But it's always a matter of negotiation and what they want for us versus what we want. And the same thing is true now, where you've got these subtle pushes into like, well, if you write this, it will be easier to sell. And what that leads to is an increasing narrowing of genre categories to try and go straight to an audience in a pipeline, rather than subject the book to, a general maybe people will find it, maybe they won't. Well,
and also really to also enable the reader to discover, new things. I mean,
right.
and I was wondering, I don't want to
jump.
Well,
that's the Amazon algorithm, right?
I was just going to say about
book,
Amazon.
You would like that book, which just recommends my own books to me. I got those. I want something new.
Me too.
But the Amazon, because I was just thinking of this, and I don't know how bad this situation is, but I remember reading a while ago that, of course, with ebooks, Amazon has enormous data. When people stop reading, or they slow down reading, or they move to something else on the Kindle, and then that data is collected and maybe fed to people who then write specifically around these points, just like a television writer has to write around the commercial break and bring up certain sort of dramatic elements if that data exists. Is that something that you guys know about? Are you talking about these things? Are you concerned about this?
I'm not concerned about writing anything but whatever it is I want to write. I'm not doing it for money because I've never had any. So any small amount I get is an immediate win. And I couldn't do that. It's like I can't do. I've been offered the odd tie-in thing, and I can't do it because it's somebody else's set of rules.
Yeah,
and I hate being told what to do. Basically, I think that's one of the reasons I've ended up a writer, is because it is ultimate freedom to do whatever. Absolutely indulge myself to the point where my editor just says, "No, stop it. Write a proper story." I'm always really impressed by people that can do that can write to that sort of brief. If you can do it and make money out of it, good on you for doing it. But it would never occur to when I signed with my agent, I told him I wanted to be the writer he would choose to embezzle first, because I know so little about what's going on. It just has no interest for me whatsoever. I want to write things and hear nothing else about it. That's it. Every so often he sends me something and I sign it, and that's it. And he's had several new houses since then.
I need to pay RJ a huge compliment here, because I actually have tremendous respect for people where I can feel as a reader. Again, this is not my profession. I mean, I write other things, but certainly not novels. And with the Bone Ships, I can feel that there is a confidence in there to in terms of pacing, to pace the narrative in a relatively slow pace that I enjoyed so much. And as I was reading it, I felt sort of this meta conversation within myself was like, you know what? RJ feels confident that he does not have to, step on the pedal here because I've been in these situations in the music industry where people say, no, you got to double it up, put more sugar here, bum, bum, bum. And that felt as if you, RJ, were fulfilling your own pacing that felt right to you. And it was in some ways what I can see that somebody say, we live in a society that needs very quick gratification. You need to add a little bit more action here. And it felt like you said, no, I want to tell this story at my own pace.
Yeah. But my editor, because I had a bit of a panic about it at the last minute and thought, have I done entirely the wrong thing? And my editor went, no, it's right. But there's kind of a few ideas. One of the ideas was I wanted to write the book like a big ship, that it takes quite a while to get going, but then once it is going, it cannot be stopped, and it's almost out of control by the end of the book. But the other thing is, I love the fiction of Patrick O'Brian, and he writes books where
he writes brilliant books. Brilliant books.
But nothing happens for 300 pages, and then there's 2 pages of action. And I chickened out of doing that because there's a lot more action. But that's one of my huge influences for this book.
Yeah, but that's the genre bargain, RJ. I mean, you're writing a certain kind of, even though there may be vast differences between what we're doing or what other people are doing, we're all writing genre fiction. We are, as we talked about earlier, making a kind of deal. But I if you don't mind, I just wanted to jump in on that point that you're making, because I'm assuming that as mentioned, that there are people here who are interested in becoming writers or who are writers and are interested in trying to move another step forward. Here's something that touches on what RJ is saying and what Drax was talking about that I think is super, super important. In general, yes, there may be a place in a market for people to write things specifically to a market, and I wish them the best of luck. But my feeling very strongly for writers who are trying to become writers, or as I said, become professional writers, is you must write the book that you want to read. You must. Yes. You are your only really good critic. You are your only really trustworthy and reliable reader. Everybody else is secondhand at best. They may be even more imaginary than that, but you know what you like. And so my feeling very strongly is you have to write the book that you would want to read, and then just pray that there are other people out there who like the same things you like, because that's the only way you can tell if you're doing anything good. I believe that super strongly.
Yeah,
I believe that too. But
second and third,
Fran, go ahead.
I want to second and third that wholeheartedly. You cannot. I mean, some people can time the market and do it very well, but when you are writing, and especially when you're learning to write, you can't. You can model your fiction on other fiction, and that's a great way to learn. But writing the story that you know how to tell and the way that you want to write it is really the best way to make sure that your story is going to be your story and not somebody else's, or that you're not going to, wind up 3 years later with a vampire novel when the cool thing right now is sentient spaceships.
And
if you're just writing your book, it's really your book, and you're going to be the one that's championing it no matter what.
Absolutely. And one more small thought that goes with that. The other thing is, for those who are writing long novels, and I have, for some god-awful mischance of fate, stumbled into that category.
Oh, no kidding.
For those who are writing long novels, especially multi-volume novels, RJ touched on this earlier, you are going to get to a point where you better goddamn love that story you're writing, because 2 or 3 years and 500,000 words in,
yes,
There are days when it's work, and you had better love it, and it had better have achieved that kind of forward momentum that RJ was talking about, and you had better love it in the way that Fran is talking about, because otherwise you're going to be 2/3 into your trilogy or whatever and go, I don't really give a shit if any of these people live or die. Why am I doing this?
Seriously.
Yeah,
I mean,
so,
and there's going to be some point where you have to go up to a stranger and say, hi, I'm writing a book about giant invisible flying carnivorous squid, and with a straight face and emphasis. And if you don't believe in yourself and you don't believe that that's, what's important, they're not going to buy it.
yeah.
And if you try that's nice, honey.
And if you try and tell them,
Fran, I actually am writing something about giant invisible flying squid.
There you go, baby.
The monster in Updraft is a giant invisible flying carnivorous squid called a skymouth. You can't see it until it opens its mouth and then it eats you.
Oh my God! I missed the giant flying invisible squid trend. I totally missed it.
We have this here.
Who knew?
We have this here in Second Life.
We could have a whole. We could have a whole squid punk movement.
I'm adding them to my new book already as we speak.
we have author Peter Watts here. His name is Squidnapper, and the first thing he did when he signed up to Second Life, he was looking on the Second Life marketplace for squids. By the way, in the background we have people walking on and off stage, so I love that. We have a guy here by the name of Andy Buddy. Hello, Andy. Welcome. Earlier we had Django 1985. He was walking on stage. If you're just tuning in, we're hitting the top of the hour, but my producers have told me that we can go over. I think we should skip the reading. I love readings, but you guys have audiobooks out, and maybe I'll force you guys to record some stuff. And because we have such an awesome conversation here, if you're just tuning in, this is the Second Life Book Club with Fran Wilde, RJ Barker, Tad Williams discussing fantasy literature and reading and writing and algorithms. The reading list from today is on bookshop.org. Draxtor Reads. You can find it there. If you have recommendations that are topical in this realm, I'll put it into the reading list. Email me at slbookclub@draxtor.com. There's a question from the Ruby Geek. And Ruby says, do you think there is more quality fantasy produced on difficult times like now? Or are there different reasons behind the resurgence of it? I guess Ruby is saying there is a resurgence, and that's a related question that I would have. Is there really a resurgence? Is it fairly flat? Or maybe implied also in that question is maybe the escapism angle. So take it where you will, and please do talk over each other. It's not a problem. That's how we roll here.
Okay, well, I can talk over everybody, so I'll wait for other people to talk, and then I'll lie up in the weeds and then leap in and take over.
We have that in common, Ted. We have that in common.
I figured that out the first time we met.
I know.
I don't know if there's resurgence in it, because I've never been part of fandom until I became a writer.
Same with me, RJ.
I've always been just sat on my couch writing things that I really thought only I wanted to read. And then suddenly I was going to sort of conventions and stuff that it's expected. But so my life has gone from very little fantasy, apart from the books I could find in the secondhand shop, to surrounded by fantasy. But I also know that's entirely artificial. So I don't know if there has been a resurgence. I'm very glad of it, because it's given me a job. But I'm probably not in a position to answer that. So, Fran.
So I grew up reading Gardner Dozois's best ofs, which are the best of science fiction and fantasy from when I was a little kid. I used to hang out in a independent bookstore, and they would keep books set aside for me, and those grew into things like the best of collections. One of the first books I can remember reading in genre is actually Jack Chalker's Midnight at the Well of Souls. And at the time, I had no clue what I was reading at all, but I just loved the complexity of it. They somehow had an arc or a secondhand copy, and they'd set it aside for me and let me read it in the bookstore. And on the other side of things, I wasn't talking to people about this part of myself. I was supposed to be, an artist and study literature and poetry. And I have my MFA in poetry, but all through that, I was sticking to reading and writing in the genre. I can remember if anybody knows what the Golden Book is, it's the Golden Book of women fantasy that was published in the early 90s. And I found some writers in there who were not writing fantasy. They were just women writing science fiction. And they, like Kenneth Jane Dorsey, who just blew me away with how creative and inventive their work was, Elizabeth Moon. And it just I was super, super sold on that while I was working in the tech industry, while I was teaching, while I was doing a whole bunch of other things. I think it's always been there. And it just has these moments where more people discover it for the first time and have that reaction of, why didn't anybody tell me that there was this whole universe here? Definitely the waves of fandom is made easier by the internet. The findability of things is a lot easier now than it was. You don't have to know the librarian or know the guy in the bookstore.
Just out of curiosity, something Fran mentioned, does everyone have a book? Like a book that just clicked in your head and thought, yes, that book?
About 4 or 5 of them, but yes.
Yeah. It was for a long time, it was Neil Stephenson for me. And probably will always kind of be a little bit.
Yeah. Well, there's actually 2 things going on with this question. This seems to be my job in life, to try and find where the strands cross over on things. Because I avoided a long conversation about evolutionary biology just a few minutes ago, and you should all thank me for that. But what I think that RJ and Fran, and I could say the same thing, but I'll hold it for a moment, is that writers, we tend to find our own way in. It tends to spring from our reading. It tends to spring from chance encounters with things that just destroy our brains, like the first time I read the first Gormenghast book by Mervyn Peake, or I read Once and Future King, any number of things that we find usually on our own, and they lead us onward. And that's because writers tend to be very self-actuated. We tend to follow what excites us. Whereas talking about the market or the field as a whole is a different thing. If there is a current resurgence in fantasy, I suspect part of it is due to what we talked about earlier, which is the increasing diversity and specificity of fantasy for certain audiences, so that you begin to pull the horror audience into parts of fantasy, or they claim parts of fantasy for themselves, et cetera, et cetera. But then the other thing are the big social events. And just like there was a boom in rotten science fiction movies when Star Wars came out, and there was a boom in crap fantasy following Tolkien, I imagine there will probably also be a boom in mediocre fantasy following the success of Game of Thrones. And so and now, obviously, don't get me wrong, there will also be people who first come into it because of these big social things, who then do wonderful, intricate, personal work. So I'm not dismissing everything that comes in because of a huge thing. I mean, Tolkien's what brought me into the field in a lot of ways. But I think that it's also important to distinguish that writers don't necessarily I don't follow the field anymore. I'm working on ideas that were in me when I was a child. So I'm not looking at other people's work except when someone says, "Oh, you should really read so and so" or something. But I'm far past the point where I am being influenced by what's happening, or any knowledge that I have of what's going on in the field as a whole. So I think it's important to realize that what the field does is quite separate from what we do as writers, which is usually very weird and idiosyncratic and personal and almost kind of masturbatory, to be honest with you.
I think video games as well have had a massive effect, because the people who would have beaten me up at school for being weird would now buy my books because they've played Skyrim.
Right.
And it's not geeky anymore. It's cool because they've played that, they understand it, and that's just another way into that world. So
that's a very good point.
Guys, real quick, I have to wrap the official part of the program in just a few minutes. Also, Fran has to leave us, and she might come back in the post game. We have post game usually about 30 minutes, and people in World can ask questions. This is the Second Life Book Club. We're here with R.J. Barker, Fran Wilde, and Tad Williams. So we're going to finish up with a few audience questions, and then again, we do a post game, and you guys can stick around as long as you want. Silas here in the chat says, do your guests read Tom Holt? Silas here is an amazing artist. He's an amazing painter and a 3D designer here as well. He worked on Tad Williams' Mandrill avatar.
I loved that avatar.
We'll get it back. We'll so get it back. But I don't know. Silas is so obsessed with Tom Holt. I love Tom Holt. Tom Holt was introduced to me by Silas. I don't want to completely derail the conversation because we only have a few minutes left. Does anybody know Tom Holt here? Just say no.
Yes. No.
Tom Holt is also KJ.
And I know KJ Parker.
Yeah.
And
I nearly had to change my name because of KJ Parker, but we came to terms.
I don't know KJ Parker. I do know Tom Holt to be a genuine humorist as compared to somebody who's writing funny fantasy because there's a genre audience for it. And that puts Tom Holt in the rare category with people like Pratchett who would be funny no matter what they wrote.
This is a really good point, Tad. It seems is that something that annoys you, Tad, or anybody here, is when people try to be humorists or comedians and they just are not. Like, Terry Pratchett obviously is the best out there, but also Tom Holt, I think, in the same category. But I would imagine there's a bunch out there that try to do a similar thing.
Well, this actually ties into something that, again, is a huge thing, and I'm not going to launch it. But basically, it's always one of the problems we have with comparing things like fantasy and a genre with literary fiction is that a genre has a commercial side, and the commercial side will pull in a lot of mediocre stuff. So it's always unfair to compare genre fiction to literary fiction because nobody buys crap literary fiction. Nobody cares about crap literary fiction, right?
Oh, I don't know.
Well, all right, not enough people.
Oh, now we're opening another can of worms. So many can of worms for dinner.
What I'm saying though is it's not a lure in the way that people don't look at it and go, "Oh, to make a lot of money," in the same magnitude as people say, "Oh, I like fantasy. I could write a fantasy novel." And that's, I guess, what I'm saying. So I didn't mean to derail everything.
No, it's fine. You guys, a great question.
Yeah. Water is here coming on the stage. We had a little mole just walking up on stage. So let me wrap up this conversation, and we will continue right after the stream wraps. This is wonderful. We could literally keep talking for hours. There's absolutely no question about it. Fran has to leave us. She hopefully comes back in the post game here. We hang out at the castle. I want to say a big thank you to Solus. Solus Enchantment is in the audience. She built this entire castle. She did the whole set design, if you will. Absolutely amazing.
It was gorgeous, and I saw way more of it than I had planned.
Yes, you were behind the stairs, behind the mirror, everything. Ted toured the whole castle. A big thanks to the entire team. In the post game, I do want to address a little bit the little brouhaha at the Hugo Awards, which was actually on the run sheet today. A little bit of a generational conflict here, perhaps. We meet here every Wednesday, as you know. Please look at the reading list, bookshop.org/shop/Draxtor Reads. Big thanks to Strawberry Bread, Patch the Mole, Silas, like I said, Kralos, Solus, and of course, the entire audience here. Thank you so much for showing up, always filling up the room. There were many people who couldn't get in. I apologize. We could open it up for more, but then we could hit lag. So we'll think about options. Maybe we'll make a bigger castle. Thank you, RJ. Thank you, Fran. Thank you, Ted. All their books are here on the table. If you love reading, you need to support the writers. These are not millionaires. I mean, except of course for Fran, who is probably just looking out for her yacht out there. I think there was a bird.
No,
that was
if
featured
it
on the
is,
yacht.
it's like it's a 1 inch by 1 inch yacht that I have, for the bathtub. But no. Please support the writers. We don't exist
Support the
without you
writers.
guys.
Support the
Absolutely.
writers.
And
Go
thank
out
you
there and buy
so
books.
much for being here.
It's been lovely meeting you, Fran, because I know you said you have to go. So
It's been a pleasure meeting you as well, RJ and Tad.
Yes,
Always
thank
great
you.
to see you.
Thank you. I hope we can do this again.
You guys can
Yeah.
I
come
would
back
love that.
anytime. You can move into the castle. There's a place behind the mirror where Tad lives. I hear it's a 2-bedroom apartment. So,
But remember, we have to have an audience, Drax. We don't exist.
That's
don't have
right.
an audience. Yeah. Okay.
Well, as somebody who is recovering from narcissism, I'm in treatment right now. I know, but so next week, just a quick teaser for next week. Next week we'll be back on the ground level with Daniel Kraus, who just released a book called The Living Dead, and this is amazing. He finished a novel that was started by the late George A. Romero, father of the modern zombie mythos, director of Night of the Living Dead from back 1968. A huge hero of mine, and George A. Romero was writing this book, and Daniel Kraus finished it. It just came out, so this is next week. I'm just completely excited about this as a complete Romero fanatic, and that's next week. And thank you all for coming. See you all next Wednesday, 12 o'clock SLT, right here at the Second Life Book Club.